Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to completely decode a book that you have probably heard of, but honestly might have entirely misunderstood. We are looking at Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince, specifically that first chapter. But we're not reading it as some dark guide to evil or ruthless tyranny. No, we're going to look at it as a masterclass in modern systems engineering. Because when you actually peel back all the 16th century historical context, what you find is this brilliantly cold mechanical blueprint for exactly how power systems transition, stabilize, and eventually collapse.
Now, this brings up a question that I think completely shatters our standard assumptions about power. Think about it. When a foreign entity, maybe a new CEO or a conquering army, just takes over an established system, why do the people inside of that system ever actually comply? We love to think it's all about right and wrong or about who truly deserves to lead, but Machiavelli's analysis of incentives and power reveals something entirely different.
So the crucial takeaway here is that humans, on a really fundamental level, just do not care about moral legitimacy. What they actually want is predictable power continuity. Machiavelli basically recognized that when a new ruler takes over, the existing elites just want to keep their privileges, right? And the general public, they just want to minimize disruption to their daily lives. So the perceived continuity of their day-to-day existence determines how much they're going to resist, completely regardless of whether this new leader is technically legitimate or not.
Okay, let's move into Section 1, the mechanics of conquest.
So Machiavelli builds his entire theory on this really ruthless operational divide. On one side, you have hereditary states. These are maintained by lineage continuity. They are essentially low-friction control systems because everybody is already used to them. On the exact opposite side, we have new states, which are acquired through external force. These are inherently high-instability systems. And the underlying engine here is simple but totally ruthless. The difficulty of controlling a state isn't uniform. It scales directly with the amount of disruption you introduce during the takeover.
If we view this whole thing as an engineering problem, we can call it the transition friction model. Basically, the absolute hardest states to stabilize are the ones where you introduce the most friction by replacing the existing structures. The harder you acquire a state, the more force and adaptation you're going to need to stabilize it. It's like a machine. Every single time you rip out an old gear and try to jam a brand new one in its place, your cost of control just skyrockets.
Moving on to Section 2, the psychology of obedience. Let's look at the human element.
Machiavelli ruthlessly exploits three incredibly predictable human patterns here. First up is the status quo bias. People don't usually resist new rulers because of some deep ideological difference. They resist because they absolutely hate having their familiar routines disrupted. Second, and this is fascinating, is the fear of instability. Humans literally fear instability more than they hate a bad ruler. They will tolerate serious oppression as long as it's predictable, but they're going to revolt the absolute second uncertainty spikes. And third, the authority transfer reflex. People will surprisingly quickly attach their loyalty to whoever appears stable, not necessarily to whoever is actually just or fair.
To sum up this whole psychological underlayer, even a conquered population is going to accept a new ruler so long as their familiar systems just stay intact. If you conquer a city, but you let the people keep their own laws, their local bureaucracy, their normal daily routines, they'll usually fall right in line. It's the disruption of the day-to-day that actually triggers the rebellion, not the new flag flying on the castle.
All right, Section 3, the physics of system change. Let's dive into the mechanics of this.
We can call this the entropy spike model. Every single conquest, or really any hostile corporate takeover, triggers a massive high entropy state. Chaos spikes, right? And your survival as the new leader depends entirely on how well you manage this temporary window of instability. Honestly, the initial takeover, that's actually the easy part. Surviving the massive entropy spike that immediately follows is where almost everyone fails.
And just look at the trap so many leaders fall into. It's the failure feedback loop. You start out with weak control, which naturally leads to a rebellion. So your knee-jerk reaction is increased repression, which, you guessed it, only breeds further instability. If your institutional continuity breaks down faster than you can actively replace it, this lethal feedback loop takes over and irreversibly destabilizes the entire system. It is literally a total collapse condition.
The structural rule of physics here is just incredibly clear. The more parts you replace, the more resistance you generate. Replacement acts as a massive instability amplifier. On the flip side, integration acts as a stability multiplier. Real control is achieved by co-opting the existing control nodes, local tax collection systems, armies, existing governance elites. You use them. You absolutely do not burn them down and start from scratch.
Which leads us directly into the continuity stabilization model. By integrating those local elites instead of just replacing them all, you create this rapid stabilization loop that severely minimizes your resource burn. You are basically letting the existing engine do all the heavy lifting for you, just under new management. You're not trying to build a brand new car from the ground up. You're really just taking the keys to the old one.
Which brings us to Section 4, Strategy Across All Domains, because this goes way beyond 16th century politics.
These exact same mechanics of transition friction apply universally, literally everywhere. Let's look at trading. A highly stable market is basically your hereditary state. A volatile regime shift is your new conquest. The key lesson? Liquidity disruption causes a massive instability spike. What about cybersecurity? A stable legacy architecture is incredibly hard to exploit, but newly migrated systems? Oh man, that's an attack surface explosion. Your transition phase is always your highest window of vulnerability. Even in military strategy, an occupation usually succeeds if you can preserve administrative continuity. Going in for total structural replacement acts as an immediate explosive catalyst for an insurgency.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway across all these different domains, whether you are navigating Wall Street, migrating a massive server database, or even playing chess, is that your greatest vulnerability is always the transition phase. Just getting your foot in the door is only step one. Managing the resulting structural disruption is the actual game you're playing.
Okay, but we have to be fair here. Section 5, Machiavelli's fatal blind spots.
Machiavelli's model isn't perfect. He assumes human loyalty is always structurally predictable, which means he entirely misses things like modern nationalism and deep ideological identity. He also completely underestimates the long-term effects of legitimacy. Plus, his whole model relies on this big assumption that conquerors are going to adapt rationally, which, if you look at history, is super optimistic, because historical leaders are very often completely irrational. And finally, he largely neglects how external geopolitical interference can just parachute in and entirely upend a transition phase.
He also falls victim to massive survivorship bias. Think about it. Machiavelli heavily analyzes the successful rulers, the ones who actually survived that entropy spike, and he draws all of his rules from their victories. Meanwhile, he largely ignores the thousands of fast-collapsing conquests that just failed instantly, which leaves all those critical failure data points really underanalyzed.
But still, let's pull all of this together with what I think is the ultimate law of system dynamics, hidden right there within Machiavelli's work. It's really the master compression block for everything we've been talking about. Disruption of structure creates instability. Preservation of structure creates control. Whether you're trying to conquer a nation-state, resist destabilization, or even just merge two different corporate departments, you absolutely have to monitor the structural continuity.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Look at your own organization, your own software deployments, maybe even your own major life changes. Ask yourself, where are the critical entropy spikes hiding in your own transitions? Because remember, at the end of the day, ultimate success isn't just about taking power or making the change, it's about actually surviving the moment that you do. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.